Hello, class, and we are back again to talk about Chapter 2, Developing the Research Hypothesis. We're going to cover the following objectives. We're going to start with describing how researchers get ideas about what to study, how to find good sources in the scientific literature, where to look. Then we're going to go on to describing theories and hypotheses and what makes a good theory and a hypothesis. And we're going to start with those today, and we'll move on to the other objectives in the next video. So objective number 1, how do you get ideas about what to study and where to go for sources in the scientific literature? Okay, well, one area in which you can get ideas about what to study is just from practical problems that you run into. So think about what are some problems that you encounter at school or at work. And maybe there's a problem, for example, that employees at your work don't recycle, let's say. They throw all their cans and bottles away. What's a way that you can think of a solution that might work? And then you could test that solution. So we think about problems that we encounter in everyday life. For example, if I have problems with students attending class, what are some potential solutions and how can I test those and see if they work? So that's one of the ways in which you can get ideas. There are also programs that are not currently being tested to see if they work. So for example, we have an orientation system at LU. Does it work? Does it actually help people get oriented into the system? What about Canvas? We use Canvas a lot. We have this class called GE 101. Is it doing what it's supposed to be doing? And so those can be turned into research projects as well. Another area is getting ideas from intuition or from your observations. What things have struck you as interesting? So for example, one of my intuitions is that LU student morale tends to be high if the student is involved in a lot of activities. So they usually really like Lincoln University when they get involved in student activities. So that's one thing that we could actually test. Does getting involved in activities make you more likely to feel good about the university? Another intuition of mine is that class performance can be predicted by class attendance. Those kinds of things may be also testable. I did a study years ago about prayer and whether prayer would calm anxiety before a test. That's a lot of people will say, oh, I'm going to pray on it, before a test. Does it actually calm anxiety before tests? And does it make you do better on tests because of that? That's something, again, that can be tested. So ask yourself, how can these be turned into research projects? On the next slide, you might just pause the video and take a look at that activity and see if you can work that out. Okay, another another way of getting some ideas is to build on some existing research. So you can look up something that interests you. And as you learned in the last chapter, replication is a wonderful, fine. We love replication in science because that's how we test science. So if you see a study that interests you, you can do that study in the same way that they did it. So you don't have to come up with novel ideas. Another great source is to look at Google Scholar. So if you just go into a Google search and you type in Scholar, it will then come up with Google Scholar. There are also library databases. Those will generally have what we call primary sources. A primary source is the journal itself that it was published in, a study, as opposed to, say, a newspaper article about that study or whatever. So we want primary sources rather than secondary, and you can get those from Google Scholar or the library databases. Interlibrary Loan can get any article. All of these are peer-reviewed research articles, and you'll get an abstract, which is just a little summary of the article itself. If you're going to use general Google or general search engine, be sure to look for websites that end in .edu, .gov, and .org. Not .com or .net. .com and .net are commercial sites. So when somebody's trying to sell you something, the information is a little bit, you need to be a little bit more skeptical about that. So look for sites that do not have commercial interest to get good information on science. Okay, So, so you might look at this and say, how can I develop a study for this existing research? Pause there. If you can figure out how are you going to develop that study? Okay, objective number 2. Theories and hypotheses. What makes a good theory or a good hypothesis? Well, first thing we got to cover is, what is a theory? A theory is a set of related constructs that are going to predict and or possibly explain a variety of events. So we've got a couple of different things there. We've got a construct of interest, some ideas, some variables. A lot of times we call those in research. And then we have the relationships between those constructs. And the relationships will generally be either causal, one construct causes the other, or they'll be predictive. One predicts the other. Okay, so, so let's take an example of a theory. We can say that consistent misbehavior, let's say a kid who's throwing a temper tantrum all the time or beating up on other kids, is caused by reinforcement for misbehavior. So meaning they're getting some kind of reward from it, and that's why they're doing it over and over again. So here's our theory, right? And the constructs there are misbehavior and reinforcement. So you got to figure out how you're going to measure those constructs, because they need to be measurable. So can you measure reinforcement? Can you measure misbehavior? Of course you can. You just got to figure ways to do it. And then here we have developed a causal relationship. One thing is caused by the other. Reinforcement causes misbehavior. And for that, we would use a test of causality, which is the experiment. And we'll get into that later in this class. You're going to use an independent variable there, which is you're going to manipulate a variable. And in this case, you would manipulate reinforcement. And then your dependent variable, you would look at what you measured would be the effect on the misbehavior. Okay, another example is learned helplessness. A repeated failure results in feelings of helplessness and inaction. There again, what are the constructs? What are the relations? Pause the video there and see if you can figure that out. Okay, well, what is a hypothesis? Now we know what a theory is. What's a hypothesis? A hypothesis is a prediction about the results of a particular study. So it's a more specific and testable than a theory, but it will have come from a lot of times a theory. And results of the study are either going to support or not support this hypothesis. So it's particular to a particular study. So let's take an example of a theory and a hypothesis together. So the theory of diffusion of responsibility says, as the number of people in a setting increases, the less a person is going to feel responsible for their own behavior. And a hypothesis coming from that theory may say that in a crowded classroom, that the more people in a classroom, that is going to negatively impact child achievement, because presumably the child does not feel as responsible for their own achievement. But there are many other hypotheses for this theory, diffusion of responsibility. And so lots of other hypotheses have been proposed. For example, if you're in a crowded place and somebody falls down to have a heart attack, then fewer people are going to help them because fewer people feel responsible in a crowd. So there's lots of potential possibilities there. Okay, I want to get into now what makes a good theory. A good theory is general. It'll explain a lot of possible things. It's simple. It explains it in the easiest way possible. We want theories to be simple. We want them to be productive. They should generate a lot of hypotheses and a lot of research studies. And then finally, we want it to be falsifiable. We want it to be possible for research to show that the theory is wrong. So, for example, take the theory of Santa Claus. If Santa Claus exists, right, that is a theory that Santa Claus brings toys to the kids on Christmas. It's not a falsifiable theory, because if let's say that you don't get any toys for Christmas, it doesn't mean there isn't a Santa Claus. It just means that you were bad that year or whatever. So it can always be right. We don't like theories that'll always be right. So I want to get into this issue of falsifiability a little bit deeper now, because that's the one thing that's kind of hard for people to understand. Well, let me tell you a story of in 1793, an epidemic of yellow fever hit Philadelphia. And it was a terrible disease and it spread very quickly, similar to COVID. And it was spread by mosquitoes. Of course, they didn't know it at first, but it would lead to liver failure. And so many, many people were dying of it. And how they treated it at the time was that they just literally took your blood out of your body. It was called bloodletting. And people believed that that was a treatment for yellow fever and for lots and lots of other diseases, right? And sometimes they would use leeches, and sometimes they would just open up veins and extract the blood. But here was the rationale. If the patient got better, then the bloodletting worked. But if the patient died, it doesn't mean the bloodletting didn't work. It just means that the disease was too far gone and the patient was too advanced or didn't get treated fast enough. And so they always still kept believing that bloodletting was working. So of course we see how absurd that was now. But what happened is the theory was unfalsifiable. Here's all the places, by the way, that they took blood out of the body. It was ridiculous. No matter what happened, the theory received support. It was always, always, always supported. So if we look at some of these theories, and if you just kind of stop there, you can see that there are many, many contrary things that are also correct. And this just shows you how none of these really are good theories, because we say exactly the opposite, right? And so you'll always find one that is correct, no matter what. We will hit objective 3 next time. You guys have a great day.